October 1918, one more hour of gas kills the century's villain. October 13, 1918, the British Second Army fires mustard gas shells near Warwick, south of Ypres, 5 weeks before the armistice. The German front is collapsing. Caught in the bombardment is a 29-year-old Austrian-born corporal, working as a regimental message runner. He's been in the trenches since 1914. Mustard gas doesn't arrive as a cloud. The British fire it in liquid-filled shells that burst on impact, spraying an oily mist that settles into mud, fabric, skin. You don't have to breathe it. It absorbs through contact. Hours later, your eyes swell shut. If the dose is high enough, your lungs fill with fluid and you drown. The killing is slow, and that slowness matters. The bombardment catches the corporal in the open. His eyes burn like glowing coals. He stumbles half-blind, gets guided to a first aid post, then evacuated east, nearly 500 miles, to a military hospital in Pacewalk, Pomerania. He arrives blinded, in pain. As far as anyone knows, just another casualty, one corporal among millions. Here's what happens next. While he lies in that hospital bed, Germany collapses, naval mutiny in Kiel, revolution in Munich. The Kaiser abdicates and flees to the Netherlands. On November 11th, German delegates sign the armistice in a railway carriage at Campigny. The war is over. Germany has lost. The corporal learns of the defeat while still blind. He later called it the worst moment of his life. The experience crystallized something, a conviction that Germany had been betrayed from within, not defeated on the battlefield. This was the Dolchstoßlegende, the stab-in-the-back myth, and it was already circulating. But he made it personal. He made it his mission. He recovers his sight within weeks, returns to Munich. In September 1919, he attends a meeting of the German Workers' Party, the DAP, which had fewer than 60 members. Within months, he's its leading speaker. Within 2 years, he's renamed it the National Socialist German Workers' Party and taken full control. From Pacewalk to Munich to everything that followed. Now what follows is speculation grounded in real events. Here's the fork. The mustard gas attack was real. The hospitalization was real, but mustard gas was lethal. It killed thousands. The difference between temporary blindness and death was often a matter of exposure duration, minutes, and the quality of immediate treatment. One more hour in that contaminated field. A slower evacuation. The corporal dies. Not as a future dictator. As an unknown Gefreiter, one of roughly 2 million German military dead. His name appears in a regimental casualty list, filed and forgotten. The Iron Cross, first class, goes uncollected. In the bureaucracy of a defeated nation, one more death changes nothing immediately. But the question that reshapes the century remains: who inherits Weimar's rage? Because the rage is still there. The conditions that made Hitler possible didn't depend on Hitler. Germany lost a war that killed 2 million people. Under Article 231 of the Versailles Treaty, it accepted sole responsibility for the conflict. It lost territory, colonies, 13% of its population. By 1923, hyperinflation destroyed the middle class. A loaf of bread cost 4 billion marks. The Weimar Republic was a democracy imposed on a nation that associated democracy with surrender. The army marched home in order, never defeated on German soil, so the myth grew that politicians had betrayed the nation. This was false. But it was powerful, and it was already weaponized by the far right before Hitler ever spoke. In our alternate timeline, the corporal dies at Ypres, and the far-right ecosystem in Germany is intact. The Freikorps, paramilitary units of demobilized soldiers, still form. Ernst Röhm, a decorated army captain, still organizes them. Röhm was already a nationalist extremist, already violent, already connected to the networks that would become the Nazi movement. He was the bridge between the military and the street. And Gregor Strasser, a pharmacist, a war veteran, a skilled organizer who built the Nazi Party's northern infrastructure. Strasser was ideologically committed to a national socialism that was more economically radical than what Hitler ultimately delivered. He was a populist who could rally crowds, not with Hitler's hypnotic intensity, but effectively. Without Hitler, Strasser could have led a movement, a different movement. And Hermann Göring, by 1918, he's already commander of the Richthofen Squadron, a national hero. After the war, he drifts into far-right politics and eventually becomes Hitler's number 2. But Göring was an opportunist, not an ideologue. Without Hitler, his ambition finds another vehicle. He had celebrity, connections, ruthlessness. He lacked only the vision. Here's the critical point. None of these men had what Hitler had. Not one combined his mesmeric oratory, his ideological fixation on Jews as the singular enemy, his political instinct for timing, his willingness to wait 14 years for power. Hitler was not replaceable. That's not a compliment. It's an observation about how particular evil can be. So what happens to the German Workers' Party without Hitler? In reality, the DAP had 55 members when he joined. It was one of dozens of Völkisch nationalist groups in Munich. Without his speaking ability, it likely remains a fringe debating club. It might merge with another group. It might dissolve. It does not become a mass movement. Without Hitler, does a beer hall putsch happen in 1923? Probably not in the same form. The putsch was Hitler's gamble, badly planned, but it gave him a platform at his trial and turned him into a national figure. Without him, the Bavarian far right is more fragmented. Röhm might attempt something, but without the theatrical dimension, it likely ends as a regional disturbance, which means no main Kampf, no Landsberg prison transformation, no rebuilding of the party as a centralized cult of personality. The Nazi Party, in any recognizable form, does not exist. And this is the harder truth, something does. The structural pressures of Weimar don't resolve themselves. The reparations, the polarization, the street violence, all of it continues. The question is what crystallizes. The most likely alternative is not a left-wing revolution. The SPD and communists were too divided, and the military would never tolerate it. The most likely alternative is a more conventional authoritarianism, a military or conservative nationalist dictatorship. Think of what actually happened in 1933, but without the Nazi Party. Hindenburg dissolves the Reichstag. Emergency powers are invoked. A strongman governs by decree. The candidates already existed. General Hans von Seeckt, who built the Reichswehr as a state within the state. Franz von Papen, the aristocratic intriguer who brokered Hitler's appointment and believed he could control him. Alfred Hugenberg, the media baron. These men wanted authoritarian rule. They used Hitler because he brought the masses. Without him, they still want power, but must find it through the old elites. So imagine Germany in the early 1930s without Hitler. The Great Depression still hits. It was a global crisis driven by American credit contraction. Unemployment still soars past 5 million. The Weimar coalition still collapses. But instead of a Nazi electoral surge, the fragmentation is wider. Hindenburg, aging and exhausted, still invokes emergency powers. A chancellor governs by decree. This Germany is still authoritarian. It still represses the left. It still rearms. It still wants to undo Versailles, to reclaim the Rhineland, absorb Austria, restore German power. These weren't Hitler's ideas. They were the consensus of the German right, shared across the military, the aristocracy, and the nationalist parties. Any right-wing government of the 1930s would have pursued them. And here's where the divergence becomes enormous. This Germany probably does not industrialize mass murder. Antisemitism was rampant in Weimar. It was baked into the nationalist right, the churches, the universities. But the Holocaust, the systematic, bureaucratic, factory-scale extermination of 11 million people, required something specific. It required an ideology that placed Jewish existence at the center of a cosmic racial struggle. And it required a leader with absolute authority and the will to implement it to the last detail. Gregor Strasser was an antisemite, so was Röhm, so was Göring, but their antisemitism was conventional, exclusionary, discriminatory, violent. It was not the apocalyptic eliminationism that drove Hitler. Without his particular fixation, persecution of Jews would likely have been brutal, but not genocidal. What about war? A Germany ruled by conservative generals would still have rearmed. It might have moved into the Rhineland, pressed claims on Austria and the Sudetenland, but it would likely have been more cautious, more calculating, less willing to gamble everything. Hitler's risk tolerance was extraordinary. He invaded Poland knowing it meant war with Britain and France. A military junta might have negotiated, bluffed, pushed incrementally. And this is the counter-argument, a fragmented authoritarian Germany might have collapsed into civil war. The Communists and Freikorps in open conflict, regional separatism in Bavaria, the army splitting. A German civil war in the 1930s would have been catastrophic, potentially drawing in the Soviet Union, France, Poland. It might have been worse. We don't know. That's the honest answer. What we can say is this. The death of one corporal at Ypres would not have prevented the catastrophe of the 20th century. The structural forces, industrial warfare, mass politics, nationalism, economic collapse were too powerful for any single death to redirect. But the specific shape of the catastrophe, the Holocaust, the invasion of Poland, the 50 million dead, those were not inevitable. They were contingent. The historian Ian Kershaw wrote that the road to Auschwitz was built by hatred but paved by indifference. That's true, but the architect was one man. Remove him and the road goes somewhere else, somewhere still dark, still unjust, still violent. But not to the same place. The Holocaust was not a natural disaster. It was a decision made by specific people under a specific leader at a specific moment. So let's draw the picture. Without Hitler, Germany in the 1930s is an authoritarian state, repressive, nationalist, rearming, hostile to its neighbors. It discriminates against Jews. It tears up Versailles incrementally. It may fight a limited war. It may collapse into factional violence. But the apocalyptic combination, global war, industrial genocide, the systematic destruction of European Jewry, that requires a specific kind of leader. And that leader is dead at Ypres. This is the uncomfortable truth of counterfactual history. It doesn't let us off the hook. The conditions that produced Nazism were systemic. They were built into the Versailles settlement, the weakness of Weimar, the pathologies of German nationalism. But the form Nazism took was personal. Ideas without the right vessel stay ideas. The vessel mattered, the corporal mattered, one more hour of gas, and he doesn't leave Pacewalk alive. So here's the question that stays with you. If the 20th century's worst catastrophe required one specific man, how many of history's horrors are contingent and how many are structural? Would the next generation have produced its own version? Or was the moment, just once, truly avoidable? Drop your answer in the comments, because this is the one question where reasonable people can disagree completely. Subscribe for more alternate history grounded in real events, and tell me in the comments, was the catastrophe contingent or structural?